I used to work for Casey Trees a long time ago. I was one of the urban foresters, and I designed the fruit tree planting or the fruit tree program where Casey Trees is a nonprofit that plants a lot of trees. They have this huge endowment. So I worked, I helped them develop a fruit tree program where we spent years assessing which trees do really well, which ones, and we try to break them down into different maintenance levels and different ways to kind of organically take care of them. We ended up planting a couple dozen orchards around the city, but we created this guide. Well, since then, every year I add a little bit more and figure out a little bit more stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of dive into it. Um, Let me see, get everything set up. All right. So today we're going to talk about types of these fruit trees that do well in this area, planting considerations, fruit tree maintenance, and I'm going to try to do a little bit of hands-on pruning demonstration with my camera. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, just a second. Let me. Okay. And let me know if anything's blocking anyone's view or anyone can't see the full slides. Okay, cool. So I want to show this real quick. So this is actually, you could actually buy these in at Merrifield Garden Center. We'll talk a little bit about this later. They're called exfoliate fruit trees. They grow along walls, like 2 dimensions. People can make fences and stuff out of them, and which is really cool. Like apples and pears can do this. They're very adaptable when you want to prune them to certain areas. But this guy, what they actually do, they'll get like 6 different types of apples. They'll take cuttings from different apple trees, and then they'll graft them, which they make little slits and line up the cambiums and then tape them up. And after about a month, they fuse together, and they'll graft 6 different apples coming out of this tree. So it's really cool. So you can actually buy these. I think they're like $300-400, but Merrifield sells these kinds of we call them Frankenstein trees. But cool. So fruit trees. So there's a lot. We're going to talk about maybe about a dozen or so fruit trees that do really well in this area. But I'm going to kind of break them apart into different kinds of maintenance levels, because that's really the biggest question with a lot of people asking, or if they're trying to design orchards, is do you want to have orchards that, basically you plant them, you water them, and then you come back and harvest them, or do you want like more higher maintenance orchards that are more typical, like apples and peaches, that people like more, but it could be a lot more pest and disease issues and things like that. So we separate them into like different low, medium, high maintenance based on the things. These are basic recommendations. Again, you don't have to do everything that we're going to talk about. Like I have a buddy that's got an apple tree in his front yard. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't thin them out. He doesn't, spray them. And because he doesn't thin them out, they're not that sweet. We'll talk about about fruit thinning to actually thin them out so we can actually increase the sugars in the fruits. And so he doesn't do that. A lot of his apples get eaten by pests and diseases, but he still gets like 60-70% of his apples, and he just makes cider out of them. So he doesn't so it's not like you have to do all these things, but if you want to have like maximum as big as possible production, the best tasting apples, the best tasting fruits and things like that, we're just going to give you a whole bunch of recommendations. But again, if you're looking for low maintenance, which is basically just watering, during the summer once a week for like 2 to 3 years, and then the trees will establish themselves, and then maybe a little light pruning, and then the medium maintenance, you're going to have maybe do a little fruit thinning, a little bit of like pest and disease management, and then higher maintenance is that's where you get into like the really a lot more maintenance. And a lot of times though, it's like hit or miss. Like if you're doing a small orchard, I know people that planted peach and apple trees and they have 0 pest and disease issues, and then I know other people that have a ton. So a lot of it's like just like a luck of a draw. But we'll talk about a lot of these trees. But let's go ahead and start off with like low level maintenance trees. Um, so hopefully, I mean, these are typically trees and fruit trees that people aren't so familiar with. There's certain issues why they don't, show up in the market as much as they could. But like, for example, Pawpaw is the first one. Pawpaw It's actually the largest fruit. I believe it definitely in the in this country. It's the largest native fruit. A lot of people mix this up with like there's another type of fruit in Africa called pawpaw, but it's completely different. Pawpaws are they're these giant green, kind of like hard bananas, fat hard bananas. They are really fantastic trees. You could actually see a lot of these if you go out into the C&O Canal Trail and like starting from Georgetown, you head towards um, Great Falls. You'll right around the Billy Goat area. If you start hiking around those trees, you'll see a lot of these up here. And if you go around like like late fall, I think it's like October or so, you can actually start harvesting a lot of them. They're really unique flavors. It's very hard to describe it. It's like a cross between a banana and a mango. If you've never had one, it's like a custardy kind of thing. I will give you a heads up though that you have to wait until they're mushy. They're kind of soft. I used to throw these foraging parties in this group house I lived in where we'd go and forage a bunch of things. And when I was working at Casey Trees, there was a farm. They have a 600-acre farm in Berryville, Virginia. Along there's the river runs right through it, and all along the river there's just hundreds of pawpaw trees, mainly because like deer don't eat pawpaw, like when saplings, they'll eat other different trees, but they don't really touch pawpaw, so pawpaws can really blow up. So we harvested all these pawpaws, brought them back, and created this party. And then everything was fine, but someone cooked up some hard unripe pawpaws, like a shish kebab kind of thing, and it got a lot of people a lot of stomach sickness. So definitely you want to wait till these things are soft before you eat. If you eat them when they're hard and unripe, you will get somewhat sick. But they are, and one of the reasons why you don't see them very often in markets is because there's a small window when they do get soft. You only have about a week or so to eat them. They don't store very long. They bruise really easily, so they're not. It's kind of hard to market this. Another reason why they don't you don't see them commercially is mainly like the flowers. So they have these really beautiful flowers. They start out as female, and then as like the pollen break up, it kind of transforms into more of a male plant flower. The problem with these flowers is they're carrion insect flowers. So they're pollinated by carrion insects, which could be like spiders and things like that. Bees and our normal pollinators don't pollinate these trees, so you have really poor pollination with these trees. So that's another reason why you don't see a lot of them out there. You can get around them. Like we have, we planted pawpaw trees at Common Good City Farm and a couple at Casey Tree Property. And what we'll do every spring is you can actually hand pollinate them. If you get this little, you just get a paintbrush and you wait till most of the flowers are starting to, the pollen starts to break up a little bit, where you can actually brush it off. And they have to be cross-pollinated, so you have to have 2 pawpaw trees. But you go to each flower on one of them, brush it into a little cup, all the pollen, and then go to the other tree and then brush the pollen into each one of the flowers, and then do and vice versa. And you do that, you have really great pollination. The tricky part with pawpaws is like they need cross-pollinators, so you need to have 2 different varieties. When I say cross-pollinating, we'll talk a lot about this because most fruit trees we're going to talk about need cross-pollination, which means you need 2 different varieties. You can't just have like 2 Fuji apple trees. They won't pollinate them. You need like a Fuji and a Gala apple, and then they'll cross-pollinate. So it's really so you need that some different kind of genes to kind of pollinate. And so the thing, what's tough with these things is you'll see like maybe like especially if you go out in the C&O Canal, you'll see tons of these trees everywhere, and a lot of them won't have fruit, mainly because they actually run like strawberries. Like their roots will actually run horizontal, and then they'll see all these they'll pop up, and they'll see whole groves of pawpaw trees, and it's actually just one pawpaw tree that's just kind of spreading out. So so you have to kind of so you have to walk around a while until you find a pollinating tree that's actually fruiting. But overall, they're really fantastic trees, especially if you have deer issues. You're trying to, if you want fruit trees and you don't want deer, destroying your trees. For some reason, deer do not like these, especially as saplings. So they work really well. If you have deer area, they grow really well in partial shade. So if you don't have a whole lot of sunlight, you just get a couple hours. Most of these are typically understory trees, so they've been designed to grow really well in low sunlight. But overall, like really great trees, and you should definitely try out. Really delicious fruit. Try to find some. I know there's some in Rock Creek, but they're really easy to find on C&O Canal. They're all over there. So check it out in the September, October. You'll see a bunch of them. All right, so question, pawpaws freeze really well, can scrape out the pulp, remove the pits, and store in the freezer. Just made pawpaw pancakes last week with last year's harvest. That is awesome. Yeah, good reminder. Yeah, they actually freeze really well. I wish I should put a picture of when you open them up, but it's like, it's just like just full of custard with these like big black seeds all over, and you can scoop it out really easy. A lot of people will make like pumpkin pies out of pawpaws and different things, and puddings and a lot of desserts and stuff. It's really good. All right, and then, I've been seeing pawpaws lately at farmers markets too. Like Tacoma, I know there's a person that comes up and sells pawpaws. So if you are interested in checking them out, yeah, again, like come in the fall and you'll see them. The next really amazing tree. So all these low maintenance trees, I'm a big fan of these low maintenance trees. I think they're really underrated and they're really delicious fruits. Persimmons is definitely one of them. Persimmons. So there's two different types of persimmons. We have Asian varieties. Those are kind of like your smaller trees, but bigger fruits. So that's where you see like, if you look down like that. And then you have American varieties. The American varieties are native. They can get really tall. They can get like 60, 70, 80 feet tall. There's a couple of them up at, I know there's one particular at the Tacoma Aquatic Center in the field, right in the baseball field right next to it. It's this giant, it's got to be like 60 feet tall. But in the native ones, they have really small fruits, much smaller ones, as opposed to Asian. That's why if you're doing backyards, I would definitely recommend the Asian pawpaw or Asian persimmons, because a lot of them don't get more, like especially if our soils won't get more than like 10, 15 feet tall. So they're easy to harvest, and they're the fruits are a lot more sweeter on the Asian ones, but they're really astringent. If anyone's ever tried one that wasn't ripe, it just sucks all the moisture out of your mouth. It's just terrible. It's like, I don't know if anyone's done the cinnamon challenge, that really horrible thing that kids do in high school where they challenge someone to eat a spoonful of cinnamon, and you can't. It just like it sucks up all the moisture, and it's just like, it's an awful experience. Don't ever try it. Don't dare anyone to try it. It's a terrible thing, but it's very similar to the stringent. It's just this awful puckering kind of thing. So that's why there's stringent and non-astringent ones, and both of them are somewhat astringent. Like you want to make sure you get them when they're ripe, but with the astringent kind. So these are the native ones and the hachia ones. I typically just wait till these fall on the ground. And then I'll eat them. Usually after they fall on the ground, they're good to go. You don't have to worry about it. Or if I, pick them, if they're, I want to wait till they're really ripe and soft and mushy, and then I'll pick them. I'll try just a little bit before I throw a whole one in my mouth, just to make sure it's not astringent. But the non-astringent ones aren't as bad. I mean, they're a little bit astringent if you pick them right, but it's nothing that terrible. But they're more like they're the ones that look like kind of giant tomatoes. And they're actually like kind of like crisp like an apple, so they're not as sweet as the astringent ones like the hachia, but they're really delicious. It's kind of like a custardy apple kind of taste to it. And these persimmons, and same with pawpaws, like you have like zero pest or disease issues in this area. Even the Asian ones, they do really well. You don't have to do anything but just water and harvest these trees. Okay, another question. I thought I was allergic to persimmons for years because I didn't know about the ripe unripe issue. Finally, I had a ripe one last year and it was fine. Yeah, and they're so delicious. Like, I mean, even though like the astringent, like it's kind of it sucks that you have to kind of get it right when it's ripe, but when you do, it's so delicious. If you want to check out the Edible Landscaping does, there's this farm in Afton, Virginia. It's a couple hour drive, but it's an amazing place. And that's where I get most of my fruit trees and berries and stuff. And they have persimmon festivals in the fall. So if you want to go out there and just try all the different persimmons and see which one you like, and you can actually take the ones home that you want. So the next one's figs. So figs are fantastic. Figs are not supposed to actually grow in this area. They need warmer climates. They don't do very well in the really cold winters. That's why you'll see a lot of them a lot of times. If we have a really bad frost, a lot of them will look like they die. The tops will die, but in reality, most of the time, I mean, every once in a while it will kill the whole plant, but most of the time the root systems survive. It's just the top dies back. So I'll talk about how to actually deal with that in a second. But then once spring comes, it will actually regrow, and you'll get a lot more branches. You know, and it gets it's a little little bit more of bush-like rather than tree when every time it does that. But in theory, you know, like figs, they can get 20 feet tall and 20 feet wide. They can be nice sized trees. But what's really great about figs is they're very versatile. You can prune the heck out of them. I know a lot of people actually every year will prune them to the ground. The reason they do that is because the figs ripen on first year growth or last year's growth, so very new growth. So all the growth, you can usually tell if you're looking at a tree, if you look closely at the branches, you'll see, it'll be a couple foot section of a branch. It'll be like, one diameter. And then the next section, 2 to 3 feet is a different diameter. It's a little bit bigger. And the next section, so you'll see, once you start looking for it, you'll see different, growths. And that's from each year. Each year, the branches get thicker and thicker. But the fruit only really sprout on first year growth. So 1 year old growth. Which means if you don't do anything and you let your tree get 20 feet tall, you're going to have all kinds of fruit on 20 feet on top of this tree, and it's really hard to get to that top of the fruit unless you have some really nice orchard ladders and stuff. So that's why a lot of people will cut it back, till like maybe 6 feet or even some people to the ground, but and then it will grow a couple feet, but then you'll have all these figs that are reachable, so. So figs definitely need full sunlight. They definitely will not survive in partial shade. They're a full sun plant. They harvest in late summer, early fall, and that's the tough part. Is like sometimes it takes a long time for the figs. They'll be green, and it could just take a while before them to actually start, ripening fully. The last step where they get soft, and you want to wait till they're soft. They almost look like they're bursting, and you definitely want to try one before, because I definitely have thought they were all ripe and harvest a bunch, and then got home and realized they were not ripe. So always try one fruit first to make sure, and then really you want to see, because most of these fruits, they kind of stick out, and once they're ripe, they'll start falling over. They won't be kind of so gutted outward. They'll be kind of hanging at that point. So you definitely want to you want to wait till it gets pretty ripe. And a lot of people, some people are, that sap that comes out, when you pull them out, there'll be some white sap that will kind of leak out. A lot of people, that will irritate their skin. So you might want to just wear some gloves when you're harvesting. It's not a huge deal. Trying to think, yeah. The problem is like the last stage of ripeness. Is a tough one, because in the last couple, it'll be in the last week or two of them getting ripe. That's kind of when the birds will start coming. And a lot of times, like if it's not a lot, you don't have a lot of birds, you're just sacrificing, maybe, like a small percentage of figs from them. But if you have a lot of birds, it can really devastate that. And so a lot of people get around that by, netting, getting these large netting structures and just netting these trees, especially if you prune them down to a reasonable size. I mean, if you have a 20-foot tree, it's really hard to net a 20-foot tree, but if you've been pruning them to like 10, 15 feet, it's more doable. Cool. And then, so if your tree does die, the top of it dies. Let's say you have a really harsh winter, and the top of that tree dies. What you want to do is kind of check and make, and kind of help bring it back, because a lot of times it seems like it's dead, in the top it's probably dead, but your root system's still alive. So you just got to give it a second to kind of bounce back. But you could do things to kind of help it, bounce back quicker. And one things you could do is you want to prune out all the dead pieces, the dead wood. And how you can tell if this is true with any woody plant, if you want to know if a branch is dead or alive, you just take your fingernail and you just scrape a really small small. Don't make a big one. Just like as small as possible. Little scrape on a piece of wood, and underneath that bark should be the cambium. The cambium is a layer that's got xylem and phloem. That's where like waters and sugars and carbs and all that stuff flow up and down. It's like a circular system of the tree. And that should, if it's alive, that should be green. So if you scrape a little bit and you see green, that's great. That branch is alive. It's going to bounce back. It's going to keep on growing. But if you scrape a little bit off and it's brown, that means that cambium's dead. So what you want to do is you want to start to kind of like, top of that, dead fig tree and start, scraping off a little bit. If it's brown, go a little bit farther down. If it's brown again, go and keep on going until you hit green. And once you hit green, you want to prune all the brown dead branches off. Sometimes it'll be brown all the way to the ground, but then you want to just prune it down to the ground. Because what happens with dead wood, it's still using a lot of energy for that wood, so you're wasting a lot of energy. And a lot of times when you prune things, it like kind of jump starts the whole system, and then and you start having a lot more growth. So if your tree does die, it doesn't. You usually don't know until spring when everything's flowering out or leafing out and your tree's doing nothing. But at that point, check it out, cut out all the dead wood, and then just give it a chance to kind of bounce back before you dig it up. And then a couple things you could do, just to kind of give it a little bit more protection. There's certain varieties like Chicago Hardy and Brown Turkey figs are a lot more resilient to harsh winter. So try to get those. Try to plant, again, the really harsh winter winds are coming from the north. So you try to give it protection. If you can plant this on the south side of a house or a south side of other trees or some kind of fence, something that can protect it from the winter winds. A lot of times it's not the winter, it's the winds that in the winter that kill your trees and plants. Or if it's just wide and open, you can actually prune it down to like a reasonable size, and you can actually wrap it up in burlap, stuff it full of leaves, mulch it really heavy. And that will give it some kind of a little bit of insulation to protect it, mainly again just to protect it against the wind at that point. All right, let's see. So a couple questions for figs. If they're leaking a milky looking juice, they aren't ripe yet. Yeah, so that's that sap that comes out for sure. Yeah, it's milkier the less ripe it is. But that's the irritant sometimes that will cause people, and you can get a little bit of sap even when they're ripe. I mean, it doesn't leak out, but you can still get it on your hands. So that's why it's good to wear gloves when if you're not. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I know I have friends who get rashes and stuff from it. Are there varieties that are green when ripe? Yeah. So there's a lot of different varieties. Like Celeste, I think is like yellowish green. I think it's more yellow. Yeah, there's all different varieties from like purple, brown, yellow, things like that. Edible Landscaping has tons of different figs if you want to check them out if you're looking for a good fig. Also, figs are super easy to propagate. So if you want to have figs and you don't want to spend any money, just find someone that does have figs, and you can take in the spring you can take some cuttings from them. See, no problem. Those are two types of figs we have at Columbia Heights. Yeah, the Turkish figs and the mission figs are purplish. Yeah, the Turkish, yeah, are green. Yeah. Oh yeah, thanks for the figs and wasp. So if you haven't had the awesome opportunity of YouTube, and you want to YouTube how does figs get pollinated, it's really fascinating. Some people find it disgusting, but I think it's fascinating. Basically, it's little predatory wasps that we remember, the wasps that attack those tomato horn worms, the really tiny ones that they'll come in and they'll crawl into the little hole when it's like first developing. And so what a fig is actually the flower. It's an inverted flower. So all that inside is an inverted flower. So if a wasp will come in, lay its eggs, and then die, and then the body gets like decomposed by the acidity. So technically you are eating dead wasp when you're eating a fig, but I mean, there's nothing left in that wasp. It's just, it's just like completely acidified at that point. But then the larva hatch, and then that little larva crawl around, and they actually pollinate the inside of this flower. They move all the pollen around to the flowers, and then they escape and fly out, and then pollinate other figs. So it's really interesting. Some people have gotten some really great camera angles on this stuff. I don't know how, but yeah, check it out on YouTube. It's pretty cool. All right, service berries. So if you don't know what a service berry is, definitely that should be your mission. Here soon. I think it's like May-ish. I always it seems like it gets later and later, but it's like yeah, around end of May, I believe. If I remember right. So service berries are essentially giant blueberry trees that no one knows about that are all over DC. So like around the end of May, you just everywhere you go, just handfuls of blueberries. It's really great, and you can just get buckets of them in some areas. So what it is, they call it service berries because it is one of the first trees that actually blooms. It's a really beautiful white bloom. And back in the day, when people would die over the winter, they couldn't bury them because the ground was frozen until spring. And so as soon as the ground would thaw, they would start burying people, and that's usually when these flowers would start blossoming. So that's where it gets its name. Service berries. It's also called Juneberry. It's got you can get single stem. I tend to think that single stems are a little bit healthier, but I see a lot of multi stems. You can get either one of them. They all do great. They can do good. They love full sun, but they can tolerate partial shade if you have a shady backyard. They live a while. And the berries are super delicious. I mean, it's like it's a little bit a watered down blueberry. So it's not, it's not as great as a blueberry, but it's definitely just as tasty. It's pretty tasty. You want to wait. Purple is the ripest, then blue is second. And like when they start out red, turn blue, and then purple. The purple are the really ripe ones, but you can eat the blue ones too. And like you go to certain areas. Like one of the best areas is if you go to Union Station and go north on First Street. I can't remember. I think it's northeast. First Street. It's right where Harris Teeter is, and Aussie, and all those, DOEE. There's all these street trees that just recently planted that are all service berries. And they're like in the most amazing soil, and they're so fruitful. Like you can just bring buckets and just fill up buckets of them. It's so good. Like I throw in my cereal, make muffins out of them and stuff like that. It's really good. The only down part about service berries is they have this really crappy disease, or it's not a disease. It's like a fungal issue called cedar apple rust. It doesn't kill the tree, but it can not, it just covers a lot of the edible berries with this like weird looking fungal things. And what happens is it overwinters. Whenever we have a mild winter and a really wet spring, it's a good chance that we're going to have a lot of this. And it's basically these spores overwinter on cedar trees. And I'll show you a picture of them later, but it looks like one of those fake poop things that you can get at like Spencer Gifts. But and then and if we have a really cold winter, they'll die. But if not, they'll survive, and then they'll shoot out pollen in the spring if it's a wet spring, and then the spores will get on these, and they also infect apple trees as well. It doesn't matter like if there's a cedar, like like they have like a couple mile radius. So if if it doesn't matter if you plant them away from cedar trees or not, they'll be they'll find a way. But even if that happens, a lot of times it doesn't affect all the fruit, or it starts affecting them towards the end of the season, so you can still get a decent harvest. Or if not, like it's not going to kill your tree. You don't have to do anything. Just next year, you'll just have to wait next year for a good harvest. But yeah, these are really, really awesome trees. I really love them, and it's good to like try to identify them and figure out where they are, because you're everywhere you go in DC. I mean, like almost every block's got like Tacoma, like whoever the arborist is in Tacoma, Maryland, and he puts service berries all over. All the street trees in Tacoma are service berries. So in a May, you just handfuls of wherever you go. And then another great low maintenance is red mulberries. So this is really important though. This is not the mulberry that you see everywhere. It's the same variety, it tastes the same. It's just a different species. That's a white mulberry. And white mulberries don't have white berries. All mulberries, they start out white. There's a white mulberry and they get red, and then they turn, like a dark purple-ish black. But white mulberry is a species, so it's still the same color berries, but it's an invasive species, and that's what you see all over there, where you see like mulberry trees growing out of cracks in streets and stuff. It's still edible, it's still really delicious. It's just, and it's actually a good thing to eat them because you want to eat them before birds get them, because then birds are going to eat them, fly around, poop them, the seeds out, and then spread invasives all over. So those are so great. But if you want to buy a mulberry tree for your backyard, which it's a really fantastic tree, it can deal with partial shade. It doesn't need full sun. It likes full sun. It can live a while. You get a huge harvest, no pest or disease issues. But you want to look for the red mulberry. Mulberry. I think it's like Mulbra rubra or something like that. Whatever the Greek terms or whatever. But the thing about red mulberries, they grow slower. They take a little bit more while, but they're not invasive, so you don't have to worry about spreading around invasives. And there's a lot of different varieties. Like Edible Landscaping has a bunch of them. There's one that it's like, I think it's like Pakistani mulberry. That grows great in this area, and the mulberry is like 8 inches long. It's huge berries, so definitely check that out if you want some really big mulberries. Just when you're harvesting these things, if you haven't harvested them, do them carefully or wear gloves, because you'll stain your clothes, and they stain really easily. So a lot of times I'll just have a bucket underneath them, and I'll just pull a branch and kind of just shake them off into a bucket. But cool. And then I believe this is probably the last of the low maintenance trees, hazelnuts. Hazelnuts are, there is American hazelnuts that's native to this area. It's also called filberts, is another name for hazelnuts. They're really more like, big shrubs than trees. They can get like, 15, 20 feet tall, but the one that we planted, I planted a lot of these at the Wingari Gardens, the garden. And there's a public forest garden there. It's got like 30 some fruit trees. Most of what we talked about, there's at least one there. If you want to check it out, anyone can go, and if they're, if something's ripe, you can pick. It's that garden by the across the street from Washington Hospital Center. But we had a couple of these. Yeah, they never got more than like 10 feet tall. It is a little tough to get the fruit, the nuts, though, because right when they start getting ripe, so they come in they're in these little sealed pouches, and they're in these clusters, and technically, like, you want to wait till they fall on the ground, or when they start falling on the ground, then you want to take the tree and just shake it every day. Go out and just shake it really well, and then like the ones that fall on the ground are ripe. You can pick those up. You want to dry them out a little bit. If you want to store them, to get, there's a lot of recipes like roasting, drying, all that stuff. But the problem is like right when they start ripening, that's when squirrels start coming in, and squirrels will definitely beat you to a lot of this. So there's a couple things you could do with squirrels. One, you could just like I said, as soon as you start noticing some of these things are ripe, like a couple of them start falling on the ground, start shaking them and try to just get beat them to it. Go out there every day and harvest before they can. We'll have a whole slide on mammals. We already talked a lot about squirrels, so I think a lot it helps with squirrels. Particularly, it's giving them food that they really like, away from your garden or away from your orchard. So having these like little squirrel houses. I just saw this amazing one people are sharing on social media, where it's like a little squirrel picnic table that's like posted on a fence. With some food, and so you can Google it. It's pretty funny. I should post the picture, but just giving they're going to want to go to especially if you keep this full. That's the problem, is you got to keep this full. As soon as this is empty, they're going to start looking around. But I think squirrels are really territorial, so that's why I always worry about these kind of things. Like, am I attracting more squirrels to the area? But what I believe, like, because what my experience with squirrels is they're very territorial. There'll be one squirrel per area or one squirrel family. So it's not like if you put this up, you're going to be attracting 1,000 squirrels. In theory, anything could happen, but in theory, that one squirrel will guard this and keep it to or one the squirrel family. So there's also another trick that I've never tried, but people have told me about. It's a little cruel, but you get like a PVC pipe, like a foot long, and you seal the back end, and you put that up into like in a tree, and supposedly squirrels, a lot of times they're just getting that stuff to save over the winter, so they'll see that, and think that's a great spot to store nuts, so they'll store all these nuts into that little PVC pipe, and then when it's full, you just grab it or you replace it with acorns or something if you want to be nice. But I've never actually tried that, but I had it, when I was researching it, I talked to some people that said that they had mixed results. It kind of worked with that. So um, all right. All right, so now we're going to move into kind of medium maintenance. So these are going to be more familiar fruit trees, but at the same time, they're going to be a little bit more maintenance than usual in the first groups. So again, they're probably going to have a little bit more pest and disease issues, and a lot more pruning, especially like pears. Pears need a decent amount of pruning. So so pears, there's two types of pears that grow really well in this area: European and an Asian. So Europeans, that is the typical pear that everyone sees, grew up with, American pear. And it's delicious, but the fallback on the European pears is, well, one, most of their varieties don't ripen on the branch. You actually have to pull them off and then like kind of store them in a cool area to actually ripen. There's a couple of varieties. I know one like Seckel will actually ripen on the branch, but most of the pears, like you have to actually store them. And then, there's another type of pear that works really great in this area. It's called Asian pears. So Asian pears, it's kind of a cross between an apple and a pear. And Asian pears, they do ripen on the branch, so you can pull them off and eat them, which is really like, if you're gonna have fruit trees, like it's a really awesome experience to actually just pull, fruit off and eat it fresh. It is crisp like an apple. It's really delicious. But a big thing though, there's a really bad disease out for pears. It's called fire blight. I'll have a whole slide on this. It basically looks like a portion of the tree just caught on fire, and it's actually this bacterial disease that you have. As soon as you see it, you got to cut it out, or it's just going to spread and kill your tree. So you got to find that. And European pears are much more susceptible to fire blight, and Asian pears are a lot more resistant. So if you're worried, if you don't want to deal with diseases and stuff, I would definitely, and you want to eat some fresh fruit, I would recommend the Asian pears. And these are great trees. They can last a long time. They do need full sunlight, and they do need a decent amount of pruning though, for sure. The plums are fantastic trees for this area. You do have a lot of like plum. You'll get a lot of mammals, and you'll get a lot of birds and things eating them. But a lot of plum trees are so plentiful that you can share a decent portion of your, with your animals, and you'll still be fine. But plum trees, they're smaller trees. Like plum. They're more compact. Like plum and peaches are both similar, in sizes. They're more. I really like. They're not going to get more than like 10, maybe 15 feet tall. In the urban area, and they don't live super long. Like a lot of these trees like pears and apples can live 50, 100, 150 years. So these guys, you're going to get like maybe 15, 20, 25 years out of these trees. So there's several different types of plums though. Like the one plums that everyone knows that we're most used to, like the purplish red plums, are Japanese plums. And wait, oh, sorry about that. So there is Japanese plums. These are really fantastic plums. They're really beautiful, especially in the fall. They have a lot of red leaves. And then you got European plums, or more the bluish types of plums, and they're very similar structures. Yeah, and they both are great, to eat, fresh off. I think Japanese plums tend to be like the more, tastier ones. In European plums, they can deal with cold better, and Japanese plums can deal with heat better. But both of them grow really well in this area. I've seen lots of European and Japanese plums in DC, and they all thrive and do really well. But they do have like there are some pest and disease issues, and there's a lot of mammals are after these plums and things like that. Um, so, oh, hold on for a second. My my daughter's showing. Hey, Ren. Hi. Okay, well, Daddy's doing a class right now, okay? So we're gonna, yeah. Can you say bye, everybody?
Bye.
Bye.
Come on upstairs with me. Yes.
Okay.
No, I don't want to. I know, but you need to. I don't want to.
All right, sorry about that. So that's probably going to happen from time to time. I got a 3-year-old, and she definitely knows. Yeah, she can. There's no lock on the basement door, so so hopefully everyone's still with me. So plums. So we have Japanese and European plums are the really great fresh eating plums. But again, there's a lot of pest and disease issues and things like that. There's a lot of pruning involved. There's a lot of maintenance. So that's why a lot of people, if they like plums and they don't really want to do anything, they look at for American plums, or they're called beach plums. So beach plums, they're really small. They're more like bushes than actual trees. Like I've seen, like some of them may get like 10 feet tall, but most of them are like 5 or 6 feet tall. They're scraggly. I mean, a lot of them, I think they started in beach areas, so they're very like tough, beach plants. And the fruits, they're probably, maybe a quarter the size of a normal plum. They're small fruits and they're big seeds in the fruit, so you don't get a whole lot of meat out of it, a lot of fruit out of it. But what you do get is that they're very plentiful, and they're literally, you don't have to do anything. I mean, you can prune them. I mean, I took care of some beach plums for a while at Common Good City Farm, and we would prune them pretty heavy. But I mean, there's no pests, no disease issues, no animals fighting after them. So definitely think about, if you're looking for very low maintenance, beach plums are great. As opposed to like Japanese and European, and they may be more delicious, but they're just a lot more maintenance. And then the next one is like cherries. So cherries do really well in this area, like the fruiting cherry. So again, like we have a lot of flowering cherries, especially down in the tidal basin in the mall. So those are definitely, those are flower cherries. They're not going to actually produce edible fruit. But we do have a lot of, I've seen a lot of edible cherries in DC, and all of them do really well. There's just 2 different varieties with cherries. There's sweet cherries and then sour cherries. So sweet cherries are definitely like that. That's the one that we get from the grocery store that are really great eating fresh. They grow, they do really well in this area. A lot of times though, that you need, they need cross-pollinating, so you need at least 2 sweet cherries of different varieties to actually produce fruit. So we're going to talk about pollination in a little bit, but that could be tricky if you only have enough room for 1 cherry, and you can't, I think there is like one, I think it's like Stella or something like that self-pollinates itself, but most sweet cherries need cross-pollinators. You need at least 2, kind of like the Pawpaw. But sour cherries are, you can still eat them fresh and not quite as good as the sweet cherries, but fresh. But a lot of people make jams and things like that out of them. They're pretty good. I still eat them fresh. I think they're really great. And they are self-pollinating. So if you only have room for 1 tree, and you want to do you can do a sour cherry. So cherries are great. They need full sun. Again, the lifespan isn't longest. It's very similar to like plums and peaches that, maybe you get like 15, 20 years out of it. I know some cherries like will live a long time, but most of the fruiting cherries don't typically live that long. About the only issue you have to deal with cherries are birds. And again, netting works really good. We'll talk more about different things to do with birds, but yeah, netting's pretty great. And now we're hitting the high maintenance. So these are the trees. Again, you don't have to do all these things, but if you really want a full productive harvest, there's going to be a lot more things you got to do to get there. And apples is a great example. Apples is a really great tree. Needs full sunlight. It can get, really tall. I've seen apples 30, 40 feet tall, get, decent size. But it's also very versatile. You can prune them back. You can get them on different, root stocks and dwarf root stocks. And you could definitely find smaller size, apples. You could find ones that fit in containers. They live a long time and they're very productive. A lot of times you'll see like old apple orchards, they'll stop producing, but if you go in there and prune them really hard and give them some fertilizer, they'll actually kickstart and they'll start producing again. But they do need a lot of pruning. They need a lot of thinning. We'll talk about thinning, but thinning is basically you're pulling out like 75% of the fruit, so because your trees just don't have enough sugars and energies to develop and sweeten all their fruit. So you're giving it, the fruit, you're increasing the quality of fruit by kind of removing a lot of it. So you do need to do that. If you want fresh eaten apples, you need to do a lot of thinning. But again, if you want to just make cider and things like that, applesauce, you don't need to do any of that stuff. But fresh apples, especially like, and there's just a lot of like diseases and stuff and a lot of bugs. Talk about like codling moth is one of them. That's really tough. But there's actually some really easy ways to deal with them. You just have to deal with them. Like there's a clay-based spray that is called a kaolin clay. We'll talk about in a second. And that stuff, it's just when you know that these certain bugs are coming in the spring, you just spray your whole orchard with this clay-based stuff. They hate it. They'll leave. And that's how most of the organic orchards are, that's how they stay organic is by using the kaolin clay stuff. But there's two types of fruiting trees. Apple trees that they have, most of them we probably see they have tip bearing. So like all the fruit will start developing on the tips of the apple trees, tip of the branches. So it's all over the tree, but it's mainly on the tips of the branches. But then there's some apple trees that use spurs, and so these are little knotty areas where they'll have like 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 and 5. Eventually they'll get tons of spurs. You have to prune some of them out, but you want like between like 2 and 5 spurs, and then each one of these buds is going to be an apple. And those typically are smaller, more compact, less maintenance trees. The spurs trees are easy to care for, as the tip bearing ones are your larger ones that are going to need a lot more maintenance. And then peaches are fantastic fruit that grows. I know a lot of people growing peaches in DC. They do really well in this area, except for lately. I kind of have to warn people against peaches just because I've seen this. There's this bacterial disease that I've just been noticing in the last like 5 or 6 years, and I always forget what it is, but it looks like I see it on peaches, and it looks like there's just like this gooey ooze stuff that's coming out, like different old growth on the peach. It's a bacterial thing, and if you get it, there's nothing you can do. Like your peach is going to die. It may be a couple years. You can prolong it. You can keep on harvesting fruit, but eventually, I've seen this like take out a lot of peach trees over the last couple years. So I kind of have to warn about it. I keep on meaning to do research and seeing if there's like any disease resistant, so I definitely, if you want a peach, research bacterial I need to make a slide about this. I can never remember the name of it, but I'll make a note. I'll send some info, and I'll see if I could find maybe there's got to be a disease resistant tree for that stuff. As that aside, these trees do really well. They need full sunlight. These are very similar like figs, where they produce their fruit on first year growth. Yeah, so that's why, or 1 year growth old. So all the small branches, they'll be full of peaches, but all the bigger, thicker wood isn't going to have any fruit. And that's why, like when you have things like this, like figs and peaches, you want to prune them really heavy every year, so you stimulate a lot more new growth, and that new growth is going to be where all that fruit is going to go. So you do have to prune these peaches really hard. You make them into these base shapes. We'll talk about how different styles for pruning that you could do, but you want to open them up so you get a lot of sunlight. That takes care of things. But yeah, I need to let me make I'm gonna make a note really quickly. I'll make a slide sometime in next week about that peach disease, because it's getting pervasive, and I'm seeing it like Common Good City Farm lost a lot of trees. A couple of orchards that we planted recently have all lost all their peach trees. So let me just write that down real quick. Okay. So moving on. And then there's a bunch of different trees where I just don't, I've been trying them out. I planted them and they've been growing well. I just don't have a whole lot of data on them, on how well they do, or different quality and traits. But all of these trees I have planted, and they're still surviving and doing well in DC. One of my favorite ones is these next ones are going to be low maintenance, and there's a couple more medium maintenance. But jujubes, they're Chinese dates. They're like a mixture between a date and an apple. So they're like these. They're small. They're like date size, but they're definitely juicier like an apple date. It's so delicious. They do really well in this area. One of the big downfalls is they have thorns. So if you have like kids and stuff, you may not want to plant them, close to where kids are playing, because they could be kind of some nasty thorns. But they're really delicious. They do really well in this area. Yeah, and the ones I've planted haven't gotten more than like 10 feet tall, but I've heard there's some varieties that can get, like 20, 30 feet tall. Pomegranate, Russian pomegranates particularly. I think pomegranates might be able to survive. It's cutting pretty close, but for this climate. But Russian pomegranates can do really well in this area. They're much more cold hardy pomegranates. They're about half the size of the normal pomegranate, but just taste exactly the same. Really delicious. And the best thing about pomegranates, is the fruit never drops. If you look on this ground, you'll never see fruit. They'll actually they'll ripen on the branch, and then they'll if no one picks them, they'll rot on that branch, but they'll never fall off. They'll stay on that branch, and that's really good to understand. Because I know like this guy that works in the urban forestry in DC, like he's always planting these like sneaking. He plants a lot of pomegranates as like street trees and stuff. So because with a lot of these street trees and parks where you have to if no one's monitoring them, they're just going to fall, and they're going to feed rats and get nasty and stuff. But these are really great street trees and park trees because you never have to worry about them falling on the ground and rotting and attracting rodents and things like that. So, but really great tree. It's like a giant 10-foot shrub, more than a tree. Dogwoods. So there's a variety of dogwoods. It's called Kuza. They have these little red balls, and they take a while to ripen. You have to wait. Yeah, definitely. Again, like try one before, just nibble on it before you eat it. But the whole ball should be. It becomes like kind of a custardy, kind of banana-y, mango, kind of thing. Very kind of similar to pawpaws. And they're small. They're probably the size of a dime. You probably wouldn't get this tree because you want these things to eat, but dogwoods just in general are beautiful flowering trees. So if you're looking for a small, great flowering tree that you can eat off of, I definitely recommend dogwoods. And then chinkapins. These are native nuts tree. I don't know a whole lot about them, but I know I never actually planted one, but I know a bunch of people that have, and they're super happy with them. I know sometimes River Smart Homes, well, that you can get some of these, because they're native. You can get them, or pawpaws and stuff. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but really great native nut. And that's the thing about most nut trees. I left out, all the big nut trees like pecans and walnuts and stuff, just because those trees they get like 100 feet tall. They're or 80 feet tall or whatever. They're like giant oak trees. They're just a lot of work, and they could take decades before they start really ripening. So I just don't think they're very practical for urban life. But definitely, there are a lot more nut trees that will grow in this area. You can buy those at Edible Landscaping if you want to check them out. I planted some of them, and I gave up on them. It's just going to take so long to start producing fruit. And then red buds doesn't have fruit, but I stuck this on because red buds are all over DC, and their flowers are really sweet and nutritious. And I think right about now, it might be over. Usually around Easter, I usually make a red bud salad. I wouldn't make a whole salad out of red bud flowers, but I'll pick a lot of flowers and mix them in with salad, and it's really delicious. And I know a lot of people will bake with red bud flowers and make cakes and stuff with red bud blossoms. It's really delicious. So if they haven't, they should be maybe about now. They should be flowering if they haven't passed. But and then some more maintenance kind of stuff. If you like almonds, there's a hardy almond. Most almonds won't survive the winter here, but there's a hardy one that will survive. and it does really well. So they look like peach pits basically, or like peaches, and you have to crack them open and dry them and stuff. And it's a lot harder. And then like I didn't notice, like squirrels never bothered with these. I mean, they would eat all of our hazelnuts, but I never saw them eat any almonds. And it's a really, really beautiful flowering tree. It's the same family as cherries, so it's like a flowering cherry. And then apricots. I don't know a whole lot about apricots. I planted a couple for other people. I haven't really followed up, but I know they're still survived and doing well. And I've heard good, I've heard it's very similar to plums. That's why you get like the plum cots, or like the cross between the two. It's almost the same qualities as like a Japanese plum tree. So if you're thinking about apricots, definitely look at that plum slide. Okay, so a couple. Oh, sorry, I missed a couple questions. The city planted a bunch of crabapple trees in front of my house. So good. Oh, so you actually eat the the crab apples. I mean, do you eat the crab apples, or do you? Because no, crab apple trees they're fantastic for a number of reasons. One, I mean, we'll talk about pollination. They're a really great way to make sure your apples get pollinated. They're very versatile, long pollinator trees. They're beautiful. But yeah, I don't know if I've ever eaten a crab apple. I saved the beach plum pit from the last summer. Can I sprout it? I think so. So here's the deal with most, so it's like half and half. A lot of these trees, like the commercial trees, like the apples and plums and peaches and stuff. So those, if you save their peach pits, or you save the seeds, they're probably not going to sprout, because a lot of them are hybrids they're bred into this particular one tree, and then they take that variety and they just they cut branches off that tree, and then they fuse them together with other root stocks, for like root stocks that have like disease resistance, or size wise, like, so examples like a red delicious apple. There's only been, to my knowledge, there's only been one actual red delicious apple, but then they propagated thousands of cuttings from that apple and grown additional trees and stuff. But if you take the seeds from a red delicious apple and plant it in the ground, it's probably going to revert back to one of its parents. But that's not true with everything. Like figs, like lemon and lime trees. A lot of these trees, they have, like, it's called open pollinated seeds, where they don't the gene pool is strong enough where if you plant their seeds, it's not going to revert. It's going to be the same plant that comes up. So you may want to research this, but that was a long answer. But I would say, I mean, I think maybe I don't think they actually propagate. I think they grow them from seeds, the beach plum. So I would research that. But if that's the case, then you should be able to grow it from, But definitely research that first. All right. And then, so containers gardens. So we talked a little bit about this, but there's a lot of great fruit trees for containers. If you don't have a yard space, or you're worried, or you're renting and you don't want to, plant something if you don't know the future of what's going to happen. So there's a couple, there's a lot of great fruit trees that do really well in containers, but they need to come inside because they can't tolerate our frost. So a lot of tropical trees like lemons, limes, citrus trees, figs do well in containers. Even bananas do really well. And I've just discovered this recent one. I haven't ordered it yet, but there is a blue banana out there. There's like hundreds of different bananas, and I think we're going to be experiencing a lot of these new bananas soon, because we've built this whole industry off of this one type of banana, which is like kava or something. I can't remember the name of it, but the basic yellow, standard size banana that's shipped everywhere. It was actually, but there's like a wilt. There's a like fusarium wilt, some kind of disease that's like wiping out all these bananas. So it's monocultural system that we built. It supposedly is not going to be around too much longer. But if that's the case, then we're going to be introduced to just all these other amazing banana varieties. And there's this one that's called blue banana that supposedly tastes just like ice cream, like vanilla ice cream. So supposedly, I haven't checked it out. I tried to order some last year, and they were sold out. But So I don't know. I can't verify, but I'm very interested. I want to try it out. But bananas do really well. I've seen a lot of. I mean, there's actually a lot of houses. I've seen like in Hyattsville. There's a couple houses that have like they get the full banana load every year. But they just have to bring those bananas inside. Dig them. A lot of people will plant them every year and then dig them up and throw them into a container, or they'll just keep them in a container throughout the year. But it takes about 3 or 4 years for a banana to actually start producing the fruit. But they will definitely fruit in this area. I don't know not much about pollination and stuff and all that. I definitely need to research that. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, but I know for a fact I've seen multiple fruiting bananas in this area. Um, but these guys, because they can't tolerate the cold, you want to bring them inside, and you don't want to keep them growing all winter. So with lights and stuff, so you want to just bring them into a cool, dark basement, and just let them dry out first in the container, and then bring them inside, and just let them. Don't water them, don't do anything to them, just let them sit in some dark, and they'll go dormant. And then in spring or in May, you can water them, kind of slowly bring them out. You got to harden them back out, and then you can bring them back outside, and you can just keep on doing that for a long time. I got lemon and lime trees. I've been doing that for years with in their containers. Then there's some other varieties. There's different dwarf varieties of different things like apples and peaches. And those, so again, like those are cuttings. They took like a Red Delicious apple branch. They cut the branch, a small section of the branch off, and then they took some other tree that it's a very small tree. And what they did was they cut off the top, and then they grafted that Red Delicious apple to that small root, the tree with the small genes. And then what happens is you get a small Red Delicious apple, and they call that dwarf varieties. There's dwarf, there's standards, semi-standard, and then full standards, or full. So those do really well. Like they can be, I've seen some apples, they could be a couple feet tall, most of them are supposed to be between 5 and 8 feet tall, but a lot of them, if you keep them, won't get that tall. But those, a lot of the apples and peaches, they do need to get, they need to feel frost over the winter. It's part of their life cycle to kind of regenerate, and get fruit going. So you need to keep those outside. I recommend, if you keep them in pots, if you can, find like a hole and throw them in the hole and cover it with mulch. That will keep them, that root ball protected, because it's kind of exposed in these pots. Or if not, maybe like just give it, some winter, wind protection from the north. And when you're doing fruit trees, definitely want to do like 5-gallon containers or bigger. You don't want to do anything smaller than one of those 5-gallon things. They're just not going to survive very well. And then cherries. They make a bush cherry that's 4 or 5 feet tall. That's it's like a sweet cherry. It's really delicious.
Josh?
Yeah.
I can't see the bottom of your slides.
Oh
because of the strip of options at the very bottom of my screen. Is there anything in this particular slide, because I'm interested in this, is there anything that's like that at the very bottom that we can't see? Like you said, for the dwarf varieties, okay, I saw that. For the dwarf varieties, it says bury container in the ground, mulch up. Do you mean literally dig a 5-gallon hole and put the whole thing down there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
That's just one option. That's your best option, because that's going to really protect that. But if not, just put it on the south side of a wall or something. Just something. Yeah. So it's got protection against that winter wind.
Okay. And Erin said she can see the whole slide.
Yeah, I apologize. What you could do if you you could download the.
I'll go to the PDF. Thank you.
I'll see if I can research what that issue is. Yeah.
Somehow, that's so funny. It disappeared. I'll figure it out. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Well, all right. And if you can't figure out, send me an email. I'll try to figure it out tomorrow. All right, then berries. So I want to talk, just have one section really quick on all the different types of berries, because this is a great thing to incorporate into your garden. This is like half my garden. Just so over the years, I just mainly because I'm getting lazier and lazier, and I have less time to deal with gardens. I've just been slowly replacing everything with perennial plants. And especially around the barrier, the borders. Like my perimeter of my garden is mainly full of like raspberries and blackberries and blueberries and gooseberries and lots of perennial herbs. And then in the middle of the garden is where I plant like my tomatoes and basils and annuals and stuff. And that way it kind of gives protection, wind protection, and also of a lot of perennial herbs. Can mask the odors against mammals and stuff, but there's a lot of really great things out there. Like vine, I've split these in different types of structures, like vines, kiwi. So there's a hardy kiwi. It's about half the size of the normal kiwi, but it does really well. Normal kiwis, I've heard you can kind of grow them in this area, but if there's a really bad winter, they will die. But hardy kiwis are fantastic. You grow them kind of like a grapevine, where they have a single trellis, and then you got to have some kind of trellis system. And once they get established, they can be pretty prolific. It grows pretty crazy. You'll get a lot of fruit. You do need at least one male plant. There's male and female plants. I think you can have like one male for like 5 or 6 female plants. But you do definitely need, if you're just getting one plant, you need to get a male plant and kind of plant it somewhere close to it. So it's the same thing. It just doesn't, it doesn't produce fruit. Passion fruit, really great. I do give a warning. This stuff can spread like crazy. I mean, there's a lot of native passion fruits for the area, and then they're non-natives, but they're not invasive. But they can spread pretty crazy. Like they'll send out runners and stuff. So just keep an eye out. Like if you use this stuff. You may have a lot of volunteers popping up. It's not too hard to handle, but they have these really delicious fruits with hard centers, and you open them up, and then it's got these gooey centers. And even the flower is beautiful, and you can also eat that flower. I'll have a whole section on edible flowers for the harvesting class, but it's a really delicious flower. But that will grow. It's like a vine. It will just attach itself to whatever you give it, and like fencing. A lot of people will grow them along chain link fences. They do really well on chain link fences. You just got to plant them on the base, and they'll just like proliferate that whole fence. And then grapes. Grapes are really, do really fantastic in this area. I've got a lot of grapes, a lot of different gardens that are plentiful. The thing about grapes is there's a lot of rust, a lot of fungal issues with grapes. So that's why you have to do things like pruning them. So grapes, they like to be in the T structure again. So you got to put 2 stakes and have some kind of trellis or some kind of fencing or something, and then you have like the grapes run along that fence, and then every year you kind of prune it back to like 4-inch laterals coming out of that T branch, and that's going to, because once you get too much growth with grapes, you'll start getting a lot of rust issues and stuff, which you can treat with fungicides, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. So it's better just to kind of keep it open, keep it in the full sun, let it dry out. Muscadine grapes are a lot better. They're a lot more disease resistant, but they're the ones that have that thick skin and then seeds and stuff. So it's if you're used to that table wine grape, the seedless grapes, those are great. Muscadine, they're still really delicious. They're still really great to eat fresh, but a lot of times people make jams and stuff out of them because there is seeds and things. But if you're worried about diseases and you want low maintenance, get a muscadine. It's a really fantastic grapes. And then if you got some time and you got you could build structures and stuff, try the table wine grapes. And I love it. It's like a lot of people, you could get creative, we actually have a pergola like this at our house, but we have a muscadine grape growing on top of it, and so all the grapes are just hanging out. Really, like, this actually works out really well if you have a pergola. You should definitely get a grape growing up on the top of it. But we still had to put like wire trellis all over it, and it was growing along the wire. So then you got bushes and shrubs. So you got blueberries, gooseberries, currants, cranberries. It looks like I've covered up that word, but there's different kinds of cranberries. Some of them are more shrubs, and some of them are more like ground covers. And elderberry and goji berry. The only thing like blueberries are probably the toughest ones. They need a special acidic soil. So I would recommend maybe doing container gardens. You can get soil acidifier to make it a little bit more acidic in your soil. But everything else, like gooseberries and currants, elderberry, all grow really fantastic. Elderberry, like you usually you process them. You don't really eat them. You can, but you don't really eat them fresh. You make jams and jellies and stuff, and they're really high antioxidants. The same with goji berries. Brambles, like when you say bramble, it's like stalks and canes and stuff. So it's like raspberries and native blackberries. So it's really important if you're getting blackberries, or if someone's like, hey, I got a bunch of blackberries in my backyard and want some, make sure they're native, because the invasive blackberry for the area, it's a Himalayan blackberry. It's just prolific. I planted a bunch of those, not realizing it was invasive, and it's a nightmare now. But a lot of people, what they do is they create hedges with these brambles. Like they'll create some kind of structure, or they'll just plant them in a row. That's what I do. I plant all my raspberries in a big long row on the east side of my garden, and it's just this long raspberry hedge. And ground covers, like strawberries, ground cherries. Ground cherries are fantastic. Just a heads up with ground cherries, they see themselves, and it's kind of hard. Once you're done with ground cherries, they'll keep on coming back for another year or two. But they can, they're like this. I always thought it was kind of like I almost thought it was like a little maple syrupy kind of like, it's like a tomatilla structure, but it's kind of this sweeter, tomato-y kind of thing, tomatilla. It grows along the ground. It's really prolific. You just wait till they fall. And then there's like these paper shells. You just pop them out. They're super delicious. Wintergreen, it's not a berry, but it's just like something that grows along the ground that you can eat, and it's minty. I have a list of local nurseries that you can go and buy things, from the area on Doug Network. But most of these things you can either get, you can order them straight to your house from Edible Landscaping or Stark Brothers. Stark Brothers has I really like them. I mean, Edible Landscaping is more like the mom and pop. They do really good work. I really like supporting them. Stark Brothers, if you're doing the larger orders, they do a lot of bare root. Like you can order, like my strawberries. I ordered 75 strawberries. It was like 5 different varieties, all that flowered and fruited at different times, for like $10. And so we just ate strawberries from literally from May to like October last year, because it's just really, so there's a lot of great deals like that. And then if you're, foraging, you want to be careful. There's some really delicious invasive berries too. Like the biggest ones, like wineberry. You'll see these all over Rock Creek. They're really delicious. And it's worthwhile. Even if you want to control invasives, I mean, it's better for us to eat them than birds to eat them and poop them out all over. Yeah, definitely don't want to replant these in your backyard or anything like that. It's all over Rock Creek. If you go on a hike in Rock Creek, I want to say maybe like June, sometime around there. I can't exactly remember that, but that's where all of them are ripe, and you'll see blackberries. And whenever you see blackberries growing in the wild, it's probably an invasive, so you don't want to replant that in your backyard. And then we're going to have a whole section on pruning, but I want to kind of be, while we're still on the topic of berries, I just want to go over a couple of structures of what to do. Like if you're doing grapes, again, you try to, if you buy them young, it'll just be a little whip, single stalk. So you want to grow it up and then kind of, train 2 branches going into a T structure. And then what you do is so there'll be lots of growth growing all over, grapes, once they're established, grow crazy. So you let that grow throughout the summer, you'll have lots of grapes and everything. And then in the spring, you want to come back or in March-ish, at the end of winter, and you want to just cut all these lateral branches, cut it all back to like 4 to 6 inches. So it should look like a T again, just with like little tiny stubs. And then and that's how you keep the rust and the fungal issues at bay. Same with like blueberry, you just want to thin your blueberry branches out once it gets, some of these blueberries will get like 5-6 feet tall and they'll just get super thick. So they could have some fungal issues. Like again, like the main theme of woody stuff is you want sunlight and air and circulation to get inside the plant. So just thinning them out every, couple years. Same with like blackberries and raspberries, just like thinning them out, and maybe cutting back as much, cutting them back maybe a third. The idea is that you want to have 5 to 10 stalks per foot area or something. But I just every, after a couple years, maybe every other year, just kind of, cut out some cut them back and thin them out. And we talked about strawberries, but again, like strawberries are only productive for a couple years, and then you want to, you know, where they send out runners, and you want to like, you know, get out, remove the old strawberries and kind of make sure, and then thin out and replant and transplant just by cutting that runner, and you can move these little guys around. All right, so oh yeah, there was a couple of things. Sorry. See. See. So it says if you click on view options up on top. Okay, so that was with about the view. What kind of grape did you give us in the cuttings? So it was a hybrid. I believe it was a Himrod hybrid. I can't remember what it was bred with, but that was like, I planted like a dozen grapes in different gardens in the last decade, and that is the most delicious grape I've ever had. It's so good. It's the grape that's grown around the shed at Wangari Gardens. So hopefully that will plant. So if it's making leaves, again, you just want to wait until you can actually tug the whole root ball out, and you may even want to pot it up. Some people will keep it growing and potting it up for a year before they transplant it out. But other people, you know, as soon as you have a root ball that's established and you can pull out, it's ready to go. But a lot of times, even if it grows leaves, it could be a little tricky because a lot of times it's not because the roots are established, it's because it's using the rest of its energy. So you just want to, the main thing is you want to make sure when you tug it, is there roots that are holding on. So apparently passion fruit leaves are also edible. Cool. And then what was the names of the grape branches you gave? Yeah. And yeah, they can grow in this area. Okay, cool. All right. All right, so now we're gonna go into some planting considerations and talk about different tips and pests and things like that, and then end with some pruning lessons. So really the biggest thing is like, you know, if you want a tree, you need to like assess your area and make sure you have a good place. There's a big, you know, saying called right tree, right place. And I added right investment level too. So you also want to think about how much do I want to water, how much do I want to thin and prune versus do I just want a low maintenance, you know, kind of thing. So you definitely want to find, you know, full sun, partial shade, you know, really important. Like you got to remember, like you want to research these trees and figure out when the maximum they're going to grow. You don't want to put like an apple tree that can grow 30 feet tall underneath telephone poles. But if your only spot is underneath a telephone pole, well, maybe you want to do a pomegranate or a hazelnut that's not going to, you know, get more than 10 feet tall. You know, and I also think, are you going to eventually, I mean, this thing may be great when it's like only 4 feet tall, but when it's 20 feet tall, what, you know, think about what is it going to shade? Is it going to shade a garden? Is it going to shade other plants? You know, these are typical spacing issues. Like if you're getting a dwarf, you want to space them out like 10 feet. You know, if you're getting like a semi-dwarf or standard, you want to give them 15 to 20 feet spacing. You know, so if you're going to plant multiple fruit trees, you want to make sure they have, you know, a decent amount of space. You don't want to crowd them together or they're not going to be very happy. So you want to, you know, so you know, follow these measurements. There'll also be measurements wherever you order them. They'll give you measurements too. But these are typical. Typically, like when I just plant standard fruit orchards, I space all my trees out by 15 feet. I think that's a good, you know, max. You know, I wouldn't go anywhere under 15 feet if I'm planting more than a couple trees. And you can get away if you zigzag it. You can actually get, you know, fit more trees in. If you're doing like, you know, like Casey trees, if you can fit 10, you know, at least 10 fruit trees, they'll actually pay for it, and they'll you know, it'll be a whole community project. So if you want to do it at a school or a park, they can help you out with that. But you got to design a bigger orchard. And you think about drainage, like, you know, check out the area after it rains, you know, because like there is no tree that likes bad drainage. All of these trees need good drainage. And I also think, you know, of course, you know, call Miss Utility, make sure you know, they'll come out. It's a free service. You're supposed to, it's actually the law. If you're going to dig anything, anywhere, you're supposed to call. They'll come and spray paint different power lines and electrical lines. You definitely don't want to plant a tree on those lines. Even if most of those lines are maybe 3 feet deep, but yeah, you don't want to be on top of that because they may, you know, if that line has damage, they may have to rip out your tree. All right, and then a lot of people will talk about contaminated soil. So you know, it's always a good idea to get a soil test if you want to, but I think a lot of the research I've done with trees and really woody plants, when it's a contaminated soil, one, if it's too contaminated, things aren't going to grow. But when it's not that when it's like moderately contaminated, with like heavy metals, leads, things like that, some trees will pull that stuff up, but they'll store it in their heartwood, or they'll store it inside their wood. And all the studies I ever read, that stuff never actually made it to the fruit. It's stored in the woody parts of the plant. So again, like the bigger issues with contaminants though is like if it gets dusty and kicking that up and inhaling it, or getting that on your fruit and not washing your fruit. So those are things to think about, and that's a good reason why, if you do have open soil and dusty paths, you might want to test that, just to make sure there's no contaminants in there. And then like how you get your trees. So let's say you got a good spot. Now you want to start selecting spots. So you start looking at nurseries, online nurseries. Go out Merrifield and places that you can check them out in person. And there's typically different types of trees. They come in these containers, or they come as B&B, like balled and burlap. Those are the really big ones. They have giant tree spades that just like scoop these trees out, or bare root, which these are really not, I mean, they grow them in like gravel beds, and then they can shake them off and kind of pull them out. And they usually dip the roots with some kind of ooze, it's like gel that keeps it hydrated. So they all, good. Like bare root is like, it's super easy to ship, it's super cheap, and it's very easy to plant. But it's hard to find. A lot of places will ship bare root trees. And then B&B, like it's a big deal. Like these are the type of trees that we plant at Casey Trees, and it's a lot of work planting them. But the nice thing is, like, once you're planted, you got this like huge tree ready to go. It's still going to take a couple years to establish itself. But most people get their fruit trees from containers, which is fine if you have a good place like Edible Landscaping that actually pots up your containers. But if you're getting them from like Home Depot or someplace that they're just going to let them sit in the yard, they're not going to pot them up. That's why it's important with these things. You want to grab them, by the base and kind of pull them out, and then check the roots. If you got a lot of roots growing around, you don't want to buy that. You want to find something that's got some healthy root structures. Oh, and like the times to plant, you want to plant either fall or spring are ideal. You can plant in the winter. It's just the ground's a little harder, but you never want to plant woody things like fruit trees and berries in the middle of the summer, because it's too hot and it's too hard for them to like establish themselves. Okay, and pollination. So this is another thing too. Once you have like the trees that you figured out, that you know what you want, now you got to figure out, do they, you do a little research on their pollination. Some trees can self-pollinate, meaning they have like all the parts, themselves, and they can, they can reproduce themselves, and that's great. Self-fertile ones are self-pollinating, but most fruit trees are cross-pollination, meaning they need two different varieties of fruit trees to pollinate themselves. And there's some charts out here you can see, like there's certain ones, and that's the tricky part, is like there's like apples have a long season where blossoms, there's early season, where blossoms open up in the, early in the spring, as opposed to mid-spring, late spring. So you have to find ones that kind of overlap with their seasons. So there's a lot of charts, a lot of information, like Gala, it's compatible like with Granny Smith, meaning like the flowers open up at the same time. But it's like, let's say it's not compatible with Golden Delicious, because Golden Delicious, maybe their blossoms open up before Gala, so you have to kind of, it's a little tricky. You gotta, if you're going to get two trees that are going to cross pollinate, you just want to do a little research and make sure they actually open up at the same time. They're compatible before you order those trees. And that's why a lot of people love crab apples, because they're very versatile. They can pollinate almost any apple tree, and they have a really long season, and they're really heavy pollinators. So there's a lot of chance. So if you, a lot of like apple orchards will plant a crab apple, like one every row, just to kind of increase the pollination. Yeah. Then planting, I'm gonna go a little bit quicker on this stuff just so we can get to the pruning stages. But yeah, typically, you want to dig the hole as big as possible, like 2 to 3 times the size of the root ball, just because you want to fluff up all that soil. You'll have all that soil in a big pile. Like it's nice to keep that on top of a tarp so you can kind of roll it back in. But maybe like dump a bag of compost and mix that up into that extra soil that you dug up. You want it when you plant it. There's a little thing on fruit trees. They're called trunk flares or root flares. It's right when like you can tell the trunk starts turning into the roots. Sometimes young trees it may not be there. Sometimes it's buried. But if you could find that, you can't always find that. But if you could find that, you want that to be the level of the ground. You don't want to bury that too deep or too high. If it's too high, it's going to dry out. If it's too deep, it builds these like nasty roots systems from it. But if possible, yeah, you want to make it like at least the top of the plant parallel. You don't want it too high or too low. So that might mean you throw it in there and then like it's too low, so you'll have to take it out and put some more dirt in. You have to adjust it. So you want to get it just right and you want to get it level. Then fill it back in. Don't tamper it too hard, like every, maybe 6 inches, give it a good a stomp. And then if you'll probably have extra dirt. So it's a good idea to make like a berm or like a donut around the tree so it captures water on top. And then mulch, you want to get some thick, shredded bark mulch. Don't use straw and things like that. And don't do that thing where they volcano mulch it, where they stack a large pile, because that will actually rot the base of the tree. You want to have it, you actually don't want mulch touching the tree. You want it like all around the tree, but not touching it. If possible. And stakes, if you don't have to stake, don't do it, because you want the tree to kind of like freak out a little bit in the wind, and it'll stimulate more root growth. But if you can't, but if you're worried about the tree, go ahead and stake it. But you want to loosely stake it. You don't want to tie it like super tight, and you want to get those stakes off within a year. You don't want to girdle it. Like if there's no room for the growth, like those people, a lot of people will use wire, and then the tree will choke itself with the wire. So you just want to have like some kind of like loose stake structure, and then remove that after a year or so. If you have like weed whackers and stuff like that, get these tree guards you put at the base. That's like the #1 killer of urban trees are landscaping crews and their weed whackers. So see, there's a question. If anyone wants to practice planting trees, volunteer with Casey Trees. Definitely, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great way. I mean, we plant at Casey Trees, we plant a lot of those B&B trees, so it's fun, but it's a big community event. And sometimes when I worked with them, we would plant like 50 or 60 trees and just get a bunch of volunteers out. It's a lot of fun, learn how to plant trees. Watering, so if you make that donut, this is a nice way to capture that water with that berm. But ideally with water, you want it to slowly leak out. So that's why they have these ooze tube, these watering bags that have little holes or emitters on the bottom, and it slowly over hours slowly leaks out. So that's nice. Or if you just build like I said, if you build a berm and just fill that up and let the water slowly seep in. You just don't want to spray a bunch of water and let it all wash off. But ideally, like trees are dormant in the winter. They may need a little water in the spring and the fall, but in the summer, they definitely need to be watered once a week. And they ideally they say anywhere from like 5 to 25 gallons of water per tree. And it takes about 2 or 3 years for a tree to establish itself, where it can actually start getting the water on its own, and you don't have to water anymore. And it helps to remulch, a couple times too. That would help keep the water from evaporating too. See, I heard recently that the square hole is better than circular. Sounds strange to me. Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, we always dug circular holes. I've never heard about that. That'd be interesting. If you want to send me anything to read on that, I'd love to read that. Then mulch, we talked a lot about mulch, but shredded bark wood, clover, white clover for living mulches, and wood chips. Wood chips actually are really great for mulch. They're very fungal, and woody plants like fungal mulches. So And then forest gardens, so there's this concept called a forest garden where the idea is where you have a fruit orchard and you plant a lot of different layers of plants. General idea is like a lot of these things. Well, one, they have, we talked about exudates, like the plants, all plants suck carbon up, and then you use some of it for their parts, and then they leach out these sugars and carbs into the soil that feeds all these bacteria and biology, and then that produces healthier soil, which produces healthier plants, and it's this big nutrient cycle. And then all these plants are shedding leaves and stems and stuff, and they're breaking down, so there's this huge nutrient recycle. You're just creating a whole ecosystem. It's really cool. We're gonna try to I'm trying to work on doing a webinar series in the summer full of like all different kinds of like unique topics, and we're going to have one hopefully on permaculture and forest gardens and stuff to talk a little bit more. But if you're interested in that stuff, check out some of these different plants, like it's different types of companion plants you can plant with your orchards and to create these forest gardens, like nitrogen fixers like clovers and cowpeas and stuff. This is actually the roots of clover, and you can see these little nodules. That's where the nitrogen is stored, and it's slowly leaches out. And also sometimes it's a symbiotic relationship with a bacteria that forms on these, but sometimes soils don't have that, so you can actually inoculate your soil. If you have a really bad soil, you might want to you can get these at garden centers or anywhere, and you just pour it in a watering can and water the soil, and then that will like prime any of your nitrogen fixers. So a couple questions. Any advice for container fruit trees like avocados or lemons? Lemons are super easy. Yeah, lemons, you want to bring them indoors, keep them dormant in the cool basement during winter, and then bring them back out and harden them in May. They're super easy, not much to think about. Avocados are really tough to grow. I get a lot of them. Avocados always sprout in like in compost bins, and everyone always tries plants them up and tries to plant them out. Avocados, because I was thinking about trying to do that in one of our greenhouses, but I talked to the avocado person down at the U.S. Botanic Gardens, and avocados we have to have a male and the female. They can get pretty tall, and they're really hard to pollinate. It helps to hand pollinate them, but yeah, avocados are really, really tough. I would not recommend them unless you do a lot of research. Okay, I've been thinking about starting a Facebook group for people in this group to ask questions and get answers. Would anyone be interested? Yeah, if you want to propose that, send me the email. I'll send that out to everybody's email, and then people can So if you want to do any kind of Facebook groups or anything to kind of talk about that stuff, feel free to send me it, and then I'll shoot it out to everybody. Paradise Lot is a fun book with two friends turning 10 acres into permaculture wonderland. Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. So I want to kind of move a little bit more quicker. I want to at least have 10 minutes to talk about pruning towards the end. So other ones like green manures, comfrey is a great one. Comfreys, like green manures are a lot, I mean, people have different definitions for green manures, but one of them is like it's basically plants like comfrey that has a big tap root, and it's just it goes like several feet into the ground and pulls up all these nutrients, and then a couple times a year you can actually cut the leaves off the comfrey, and then mulch a plant with them, and then all that nutrients that it's been mining will break down and actually fertilize the plants. So it's a really fantastic plant to include in your orchards, and you can let it just grow and naturally kind of defoliate, or you can just a couple times a year just chop it back and then chop it up and mulch. It's a really, really great plant. Soil decompactors, we talked about, like dandelions to daikon radishes. If you have really bad soil and you just don't harvest them, you leave them in there, and then they'll leach out a lot of organic matter. Companion plants like different things like tansies will keep away Japanese beetles, alliums will keep away root-eating nematodes, things like that. Nasturtiums are good at keeping away a lot of like bad bugs for trees. And then you want to think about attracting bugs, which we talked a lot about this already, like marigolds, black-eyed Susans, dill, things like that. That'll attract your beneficial insects that will pollinate and eat your bad bugs. Mycorrhizae, we talked a lot about that, but this is you definitely want to this is a really great idea for your trees, and you can buy the powder. It's a symbiotic fungus that attaches onto the roots, and it will send nutrients, and it feeds the tree, will feed the mycorrhizae with sugars, and then the mycorrhizae will grab water and nutrients and bring it back to the tree. You can get the powder form if you want to, or like I said, you go to like a Rock Creek Park or someplace, and if you see a really healthy tree, just just grab maybe a cup full of soil at the base and just mix that into your backfill, and that's going to inoculate with all kinds of good mycorrhizae. Maintenance. So typical fruit tree maintenance, a lot of it's just like orchard sanitation. Like when you see something diseased, you want to cut that out and throw it in the trash. When you see a broken branch, from the wind, you want to cut that back into like a clean cut. You want to pick up your fruit. If you let your fruit just rot on the ground, you're going to attract rats and all kinds of things. So you definitely want to be on top of that. And just like when all the leaves fall, maybe either rake them all up and compost them, or like run a lawnmower over them. A lot of times you just let the leaves like this, they'll get matted and on wet, and they can get anaerobic. Fruit thinning. So for a lot of trees need to be fruit thinned, just because they produce more fruit than they have sugars and carbs so a lot of that fruit, like apples, if you don't thin apples, they're not going to be very sweet, and a lot of times they crowd themselves and they'll have a lot of rots and stuff. When two pieces of fruit are touching each other, they'll get you'll get fungus and rots in those touching points. So you want to space them out, or you want to wait till they're like about the size of a dime, and then space them out every every 2 to 5 inches, depending on the idea. The idea is once these fruits grow whole, they still won't be touching themselves. So like this is a peach tree, so they took out all the little peaches every 5 inches, and then if there's like a cluster, you only want like 1 or 2 so if it coming from like a spur, you want to like cut out. Select like the 2 biggest ones and then cut out the rest, and that should and you do that for like peaches and apricots and nectarines, cherries, apples and pears. Like I said, there's not enough sugar to sweeten all these fruits, so you got to thin them out. They'll be healthier, sweeter fruit, and the tree itself will be a lot healthier. There'll be less like limbs breaking from the weight. Like peach trees, if you don't thin out peach trees, they'll literally like destroy themselves. They produce so much fruit that they'll just start breaking all the limbs. So definitely think about thinning. Like I said, you want to do that when the fruit's about the size of a dime. And then harvesting, definitely just do your research on harvesting. Like every fruit, either has a color or smell, or some of them you have to wait till they drop, things like that. If you don't want, there's making these special orchard ladders that you can get in, that are triangles that you can get into, the trees. Or if you don't want to get on the ladder, you can get, harvesting pools, or just prune your tree to keep it small, so you don't have to. And then I've been experimenting with a lot of these in our parks. I'll set up netting structures, so when the fruit falls, instead of it falling and splattering and attracting rodents, it'll actually fall into this net. Safely, it won't splatter, and it'll give some more time for people to actually pick it up, and because that's what attracts rodents, is when they fall and they bruise or break, and then they rot, and then they smell, and that's when they attract things. But if you can actually prevent that from falling too far or bruising themselves or rotting, then you're going to have a lot less mammal issues. And then long-term health, some of this stuff, these are like when you have trees for a long-term. Idea, there's what's called a drip line. The idea is like where all the leaf, as far as the branches go, if you go directly down, you want that whole area to be mulched. You don't want sod to grow up straight to the tree, because it's going to prevent water and nutrients from getting to the roots. So ideally, as your tree gets bigger, you want to have a bigger mulch ring. So it's a good idea every year to kind of remulch your plants, kind of weed them, maybe prevent the grass from retaking it. And you can also, as you're doing it, you could fertilize it. You can lay some compost on top dress it. But really, I don't think you really. I would only do that if your tree looks like it's struggling. And then you can also aerate. If you plant a tree in the area and too many people compacted the area, you can actually aerate it. It's called vertical mulching, where you take power drills and augers and drill holes, and then shove some organic material and mulch and stuff in there, and just let it decompose. All right. Let's see. So mammals. Okay. So we'll try to go through this in the next 5 minutes, and then I'll try to do a quick little pruning lesson. So deer, yeah. So deer, we already talked a lot about this. Deer, you know, like motion sensors work great with them. I mean, they really love like young saplings. They love to like rub their horns against them and like strip the bark. So like having, you know, some kind of like trunk guards, or if you just have a really bad deer area, you know, planting pawpaws. They won't do this for some reason. The pawpaws, squirrels, again, you know, getting that little, you know, squirrel hotel. Things like that. Again, a lot of times, with like especially with peaches and apples, you'll see all these peaches like on the ground with a single bite out of them, and that's again like, you know, the squirrel's just thirsty. He's just like taking a little bite and then licking up the juices. So maybe getting like a bird bath or a water dish or something. You know, birds, netting works typically the best for that. And then rats, basically the only thing about rats is just make sure you pick up your fallen fruit so you don't track them to the they'll be attracted to the rotting fruit. All kinds of insects out there. Most of them aren't that huge of a deal. It's kind of like the same thing for a lot of them. You know, like Japanese beetles, whenever you see the white grubs, you know, when you dig up, you know, throw those things in the yard or squish them. They're almost always Japanese beetles. Stink bugs, you know, like plum curios, look like gonzo looking guys. They have these little, I think they look like whenever you see like the Star Wars rebel sign. So that's like an indication that you have some bugs in there when you see like bite marks like this. So a lot of this stuff, you know, like codling moths, so that's with the worms and the apples. So a lot of times when people will wait to see them, or they'll set up these little, you know, monitor stations. Like this is a milk carton, they drill a hole into it and they put little orange juice or apple cider vinegar, and they hang that in the apple orchard. And they check that, you know, every day, because they know in spring, you know, that's when the codling moths start to come. And so like, you know, when they see one, or if they start seeing Japanese beetles, or you start seeing that, that's a good indicator that they'll go grab some kaolin clay and they'll just spray the whole orchard with kaolin clay. And they'll do that like, you know, every other week for the next month. So then these bugs that normally land and lay their eggs will fly somewhere else. So that's the best way to really deal with a lot of these. Like this kaolin clay is fantastic spray. It's like if you have like Japanese beetles, they'll come out, and if you start seeing all your leaves are being munched on, they'll defoliate a whole tree. I mean, usually don't kill it, but they'll set it back. So if you start seeing that happening, just spray that whole tree with kaolin clay. It looks like this stuff, it looks like it's completely covered in like mildew or like powder sugar, but it allows sunlight to get through. It's and bugs hate it. They don't. I mean, they won't even land on it. So that's really like the best thing. And there's a couple tricks you do, like you have a peach borer, you can actually get a coat hanger and you know squish them in there. If you see caterpillar tents, typically like there's a lot of native caterpillars and stuff. They'll defoliate your tree. They usually won't kill it. What a lot of people do is they just open up they'll take a stick and they'll just open up that tent and they'll just let birds come and eat them because it's a part of it's a natural part of the ecosystem, but it's really up to you. Yeah. And pathogens. So most of these pathogens are fungal issues. There's only one bacterial pathogen I know of in this area, and that's fire blight. And with fire blight, this is what fire blight looks like. It looks like it's, you know, a little piece of your branch caught on fire. So if you see that, you want to cut that out as quickly as possible, because it will kill your tree and it spreads pretty quickly. And you want to keep on cutting back the tree until the cambium is green. You can see this is infected. This cambium is infected with fire blight because it's got this black in its cambium. So keep on cutting it back until you have healthy green cambium again. A lot of this stuff is just like, you know, just pruning, every winter. Do a structural pruning. Open up your, you know, tree, allow more sunlight to get in. That's going to deal with that's because a lot of these things, the powdery mildew, a lot of these rots and apple scabs and stuff, they're just fungus issues. They're mildew issues. It's too wet and it's too humid inside your tree, so it just like starts to rot and stuff. Thinning helps out. A lot of these brown rots, a lot of times they get that because the fruits are touching and then they start rotting in between. So thinning and pruning, you know, will eliminate most of these fungal issues. This is that cedar apple rust. So this is what it looks like on a cedar tree. They look like these, like, I think it's like that fake gag, you know, dog poop that you get in like Spencer Gifts or something. So they live on cedar trees over the winter, and then if it's a wet enough spring in a mild winter that didn't kill them, they'll grow these like orange dread-like tentacles, and then they'll shoot out, you know, And they, I mean, and don't cut down your cedar trees. Like, I mean, they can travel miles. So, you're going to get it anyways. This though, this is one of the worst things, gummos. This is gummios or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce it, but this is that disease I'm talking about that's killing all of our peach trees right now. And this is, I kind of would recommend not planting fruit peach trees, just because of this. There's ways to deal with it. Again, like pruning, opening up, but it's an infection. A lot of times it'll come with bad pruning cuts or bad broken branches. It's got to be a vector that gets into. And then it will, I mean, your tree will be fine. It'll just look like there's jello coming out at certain spots. And it'll be fine for a couple years, but eventually this will kill the tree. And there's not really, I don't know any way to really like, I mean, I think there's some like fungicides and stuff you could try to use. And it's good, like if you see this, if you can cut this out, cut the branches out. But for the most part, it's going to kill your tree. So it's a tough one to deal with. A lot of this stuff, yeah, like I said, it's just prevention. It's just like, selecting certain varieties, like Red Haven peach trees. Like if you want to do peach trees, there's a peach curl fungus, but they just, they bred trees to be resistant to that. So there's a Red Haven is resistant to the peach curl. So I'm kind of waiting for them to make a peach tree that is resistant to the gummiosis before I buy any more peach trees. But avoid excess nitrogen. That just creates a lot of leaf growth and a lot of unhealthy growth. Making sure you thin things out. Treatments could be like, a lot of this stuff like spraying like compost teas and neem oils will help a lot of like with powdery mildews and stuff. You can get more heavy fungicides like copper and sulfur and pyrithium, which these are all organic, but you gotta be careful with these things. Like you gotta have protective gear. You need to really research what you're doing before you spray this stuff. Yeah, but these are like kind of more, they're still organic, but they're heavy duty fungicides that I don't recommend unless you know what you're doing. And then just pruning, structural pruning and getting that sunlight in there and opening up your trees, really helps out a lot. Yeah, so compost teas. So we talked a lot about compost. So different sprays that you can use. The kaolin clay is like the best. You can order this from Edible Landscaping. It's like $20 for a box that will last you like 10 years. You just mix a little bit of it in water and then spray it. Compost tea, we talked about that, how to make that. You just get some finished compost, put it in pantyhose, hang it in a bucket of water, get a $10 bubbler from a pet store, add some organic molasses, and then bubble it for a day or two, and then spray it all over your tree. And that's just like a probiotic that's just going to help you your tree fight funguses and bacteria. Hot pepper sprays, for pests and diseases, and homemade fungicides, all work good. Like, having baking soda or apple cider vinegar are really great, fungicide, natural fungicides. Just with something that's going to, like Dr. Bronner's, that's going to keep it stuck to the tree. I always suggest when you're making a DIY, a home fungicide, spray a little bit of the tree first and then wait a day or two. And then just in case it doesn't make anything super toxic, and then go from there. Yeah, we talked about different sprayers. I mean, if you have a couple fruit trees, you might want to get away from these hand sprayers and get like, for $20, you can get like a crank sprayer. For like 40 or 50, you can get a backpack sprayer. It just depends on how much time you want to, and how much you're spraying. All right, so the last part we're going to talk about is pruning. So this is probably going to be the last like 10-minute little lesson. But I do recommend, if you do fruit trees, take a pruning class. Casey Trees does a pruning class where they go out to, it's called Dangerfield Island. That's where the national parks grows all their elm trees. And they have it's like 100, 150 elms, and they do a class where they'll train you, and then you just prune elms for an hour or two. And that's like the best way to really understand pruning. It's just to like spend an hour pruning. And but pruning, there's different types of pruning. You prune, sanitation pruning, you're pruning for structure, you're pruning different whips, and you're training, different styles and different, for production. So the first thing to understand is you want to have the right equipment. So you want to have what's called hand pruner, it's called bypass pruners. You don't want the pruners that are scissors that have two blades. They don't make clean cuts. You want to have it where one side's a blade and one side's like just a bar. That's called a bypass pruner, and that's where you're going to get the cleanest cuts. You know, getting a saw. If you have a tall tree, you can get pole saws. You know, getting some kind of hand sanitizer when it's accessible again. So when you're cutting out disease things, you want to sanitize your blade every time you make a disease cut. You know, loppers if you got some big branches. And then, you know, equipment maintenance is always, you know, like it's good to like oil, you know, clean your blades every winter, like with some steel wool, and then like, you know, oil them. Use vegetable oil, not mechanical oil, because you don't want industrial oil if you're pruning organic things, because then you can, you know, you don't want that getting into the cambiums. You want to, you know, use vegetable oil. You could, you know, these are hand pruner sharpeners. You know, you could sharpen saw blades, but it takes forever. I would just recommend buying a new blade. All right, so let's talk about the first thing about pruning we need to understand is making the right cuts. So there's really four cuts that we do with pruning. The first cut is it's called a branch collar cut. And this is, let's say I want to take a branch off. If I just cut it flush, it's going to be a nasty wound. It's going to take forever to heal. And why it's taking forever to heal, there's going to be insects and diseases and stuff getting in there and infecting your tree. If I cut a stub, if I leave a stub, it's just going to rot. And then again, diseases are going to get in there. What I want to do is I want to find the nubby area in the branch. It's called a meristem growth. I want to cut just above that nubby area, because this is really quick growing tissue. So if I just cut it right above the nubby area, I leave just the little nubby part, it's going to seal up really quickly, most likely before any diseases or anything gets into it. So that's how you make like a really clean cut. And then if I have a branch that's just growing up, it's called subordinating branches, branch cut. So let's say I want to keep this branch, but I just want to cut it halfway back. So I want to look for the bud. These are all dormant buds. A lot of times these buds, they'll stay dormant because it's called apical dominance. The buds on the end of the branch send like signals keeping these buds from growing. So if I cut this back to I want to find a bud that's pointed in the right direction I want. All branches from a trunk should be growing outward. Don't want anything ever growing back inward towards the branch. So I'm going to look for an outward facing bud. I'm going to cut that branch back to there. And then this bud is going to be released from this apical dominance, and it's going to start growing, but it's going to grow in the direction that it's pointed in. So then, so you can, you know, a lot of times too, for some reason, like a lot of your branches are going to want to grow vertically. They want to go straight towards the sun. For some reason, though, most branches that grow towards the sun tend to be more vegetative, having more leaves, and most branches that grow outward and at angles, like 40 to 60 degree angles, tend to have a lot more fruit. So a lot of times you're making these cuts because you're training your tree more at a nice angle. Instead of having it grow upward, you're doing training cuts where you're taking this branch off and taking this branch off, and all of a sudden, instead of having this branch that was growing upward, you have this new branch that's growing at like a 40 to 60 degree angle. And then the last part, the branch bark ridge. Or the three-part cut. Sorry. So this is if you have a big heavy branch, you need to take this branch off. If I just like start sawing this branch like normal, I'm going to get halfway through this branch, and the weight of this branch is going to snap the branch. And what's going to happen is it's going to snap, but then it's going to tear the bark, because the bark doesn't snap, only the wood snaps. But the bark's going to stay attached, and that bark is as that branch falls, it's going to pull the bark and tear it all the way down and leave a huge wound. It's going to take forever to heal, and it's likely going to get diseases. So instead, there's a three-part cut where I make a safety cut right here, and then I cut up here just to take the weight off. So I start cutting up top here, and then I get halfway through, and then the branch snaps off because of the weight. It rips the bark, but it stops at the safety cut. And then I have a much lighter little stub to work with, and now I can make a nice finished cut that's going to leave this nubby area that's going to heal up really quickly. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to demonstrate real quick, try to do a demonstration on how to actually make a couple of these cuts. So I got my pruners. Hopefully everyone can see my video now. All right. Yeah. So these are the bypass pruners. Definitely want to get bypass pruners. So like you have a blade on one side, and then this side there's no blade, so it's not going to cut anything. How do I make this full screen? So a lot I need to figure out about web next. Okay, well hopefully everyone can see it. I can barely see it. I'm on a tiny little screen. But so when I'm making cuts, another thing to remember is when you're making like a cut on a branch, you never want to be at an angle. You always want to be perpendicular like this. This is going to make a nice clean cut. I mean, sometimes you have to get a little bit at an angle, but try to be as perpendicular as possible. Because if you do like a this is going to be just a nasty cut if you just like cut it at a bad angle. So a couple cuts. So if I'm making, I'm taking a branch off. Again, hopefully everyone can see this. That you can see the nubby area right in here. So I want to keep as much of a nubby area as possible. Like if I cut this branch, and leave a stump, this stump is going to start rotting, and that's going to be a vector for diseases. So what I want to do is I want to try to get it. And, again, like your blade, you want to get this blade side touching where, depending on how I'm cutting, like if I cut it, yeah, you want the blade touching the tree, so you got to get up there close. So then that, if you look, I left this nice little stubby area, and that's called meristem growth. It's going to grow, and that's going to seal up really quickly before any diseases get in there, as opposed to if I did like if I did a flush cut, that's going to be even bigger of a hole. It's flush. It's going to take a while to fill up. So you want to leave that nubby area. All right, and then the next one. Let's see. Okay, so subordinating cut. So I have this. Let's say I have this branch. I need to cut this branch back. So I'm going to try to find the little buds that are growing dormant. And let's say I want this branch to go that way. So I'm going to just cut it right above a dormant bud. Right, so I'm cut it above this dormant bud. And now that bud right here, that bud is going, because this branch is going to stop growing now. But this bud is going to be the new branch. So this bud's going to start growing in the direction it's pointing, and it'll eventually start going upward towards the sun. But that's how you kind of cut back. You just want to locate the bud that's going in the right direction that you want, and then just cut it right above that bud. And training cuts. Let's say I have this. I have this like let's see. It's all kind of growing upward. It's trying to get, it's growing towards the sun, but I want this to grow more outward, so it's going to be more productive and I can reach the fruit better. So now I'll cut a lot of these branches off. Yeah, maybe I'll cut this side down. And now I'm kind of sculpting this branch. So it's now instead of a branch that's growing upward, I'm sculpting it. So now it's kind of growing outward more at an angle I want. So a lot of this is just kind of like, it's kind of an art. Just over years, you're like slowly sculpting this into like the right directions that you want and angles that you want. Then the last thing, I'll show you the 3-part cut, which I can't actually do. I wouldn't be very safe. But imagine this is a super heavy branch. And if I just start cutting it like normal, the branch is going to snap and it's going to just like, take all the bark with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little safety cut down here. And then I'm going to start sawing up on the top of the branch. This is going to snap, fall. The branch bark's going to get stripped to that safety cut. And then I can go back down and I can make that clean angle, a clean, cut right at the stubby area. So those are the 4 main cuts that you need. So someone had a question. I like anvil pruners. Are they harmful? I'm not really sure what an anvil pruner is. Maybe if you could send me a photo or send me an email of it, I can let you know. All right, so I'm gonna jump back for to the presentation. Like I said, we probably got about 5 more minutes left. Um, all right. Okay. And how I take. All right. So now that we know how to cut, hopefully cut the branch, and that's why I mean that just comes with practice. Like that's why I'm saying like taking a case of trees elm pruning class is great. Just to like prune elms for a couple hours, and you'll be an expert at this stuff afterwards. But there's a couple different types of pruning that we do, and we do them in different types of the year. One pruning is called sanitation pruning. So this is like anything that's like broken or diseased or things like that. Like, so if you have a branch that's like broken and it's like hanging off, you want to cut that back to like your outward facing bud or to like, a clean, cut, because that's just going to be a hole that's going to take forever to heal, and you're going to get diseases in that hole. So that's why you want to prune, anything that's broken, prune that into a nice cut, so it can heal nicely. Water sprouts and suckers, a lot of times if it's tree stress, they'll shoot up a bunch of sprouts. So you could take those out anytime because they're just going to waste energy. Anything that's diseased or damaged, cut that out, make clean cuts. Oh, and one thing that when you're cutting out like diseased things, don't cut that out when it's raining or on a wet day, because it can, or you want to wait till a dry day to cut things out, or it can help, spread it. And then structural pruning. So this is where you're actually sculpting the tree. And this is you do this towards the end of winter because you're going to take a lot of wood out of your tree when you structurally prune it. And the more you cut, even though it seems like you're hurting the tree, the more you cut, the more you're actually you're invigorating it, and you're jump starting it to grow more. So you don't want to do this at the beginning of the winter, because then if there's like a warm week, it may start growing, may produce some buds and flowers, and then the frost comes, kills your buds, and then you don't get fruit that year. So that's why you want to wait till the end of winter, preferably when it's still dormant. But like February, March is when you want to prune things. And with structural pruning, you're doing a couple different things. You're establishing the leader system. And so a lot of trees have central leaders where they just have one big trunk that grows, and then everything else needs to be, less tall than that central leader. So like apples and sweet cherries and pears. But then a lot of things have multiple leaders. So they have like, they're more like open vases, like peaches and sour cherries and stuff like that. You want to open them up with multiple leaders, and then that allows more sunlight to go in and things like that. A lot of times you could, I've seen, apple trees with multiple leaders. I've seen, peach trees that have central leaders. You can play around with this stuff. Like, I don't want to make, like, again, like I'm telling you what to do to have full production, trees, but a lot of this stuff you don't have to. Yeah, you can play around with and adjust to make it work into your area. And then a lot of times you're pruning your structures, your branch angles. You want to get rid of all the branches growing upward, and you want to prune them to be like 40 to 60-degree angles. Prune them. You want everything growing outward from the trunk. Anything that's growing back towards the trunk, you want to prune that out. And a lot of times, maybe you want to prune things to keep them reachable. But the ultimate goal of this is not only to have like healthy root system or branch systems, but to allow sunlight and air circulation into your tree. And if you can do that, then you won't have to worry about the majority of the diseases that we talked about. That's the thing. If you could just, do a good structural pruning every year, that's going to prevent most of the issues that you're going to have throughout the year. So you can see different structures, like these are central leader structures, pears and apples. These are multi-branch ones that will maybe have 4 or 5, leaders that are all about the same. So when you're structural pruning, the general idea, there's a general rule of thumb that you don't want to take more than a third of your tree off. Anything more, then they could actually struggle it, and they may have to, it may not be that healthy. And that's give or take. Like, I mean, these are rough parts. Don't worry about, like, if you take a little bit too much off, your tree's gonna be fine. But the general idea is you want to keep in your mind that you don't want to prune more than 30% of that tree. And so, because with structural pruning, we actually we prioritize different steps. There's actually 4 main steps in structural pruning, and we prioritize the most important steps. Because let's say you get through the first 2 steps and you've taken at least 30% off your tree, then you want to stop there and you want to wait till next year to keep on working. But it's important to do the most important things at first. And the most important things is, one is you want to sanitation prune. Even though you're sanitation pruning all year long, you want to give it a good sanitation prune, get out any disease branches, especially branches that are rubbing together. They'll rub in the wind and they'll cause wounds, and then that's a vector for diseases. So you want to prune any disease things out. And then the second one, you want to start working on a central leader. So if you have an apple tree, maybe you want to cut back any branches that are competing against the main leader. Sometimes you got to walk around your tree a couple times and figure out which that main leader is. Yeah, you want to cut anything competing. Or if you have multiple, if you have a peach tree, you want to kind of, identify 3 to 5 main branches and kind of cut back everything else. So you want to kind of, the idea is you want to kind of, you're establishing the structure of the tree, whether it's an open base or whether it's like a Christmas tree, like central leader. And then if you haven't taken that much off it, then you can start working on just thinning the canopy out. And a lot of times look for anything that's growing back towards the tree, cut those out. Any water suckers that are growing vertical, cut those out. You just want to kind of open up the tree so you get sunlight, more sunlight in that middle of that tree. And then even more like thinning the crown out is like, if you haven't gotten, if you haven't gotten to 30% by now, you can start doing some, crown thinning, which is basically you're trying to space out all your branches. Like a lot of times you'll have like 5 branches coming from one spot, and then there'll be 2 feet and there'll be another branch. I mean, it's just not, symmetrical. So you want to thin things out. So there's 1 branch, and 6 inches on the other side is another branch, and then 6 inches on another side is another branch. And you do that, it's just more about just thinning it out, and again, allowing more sunlight and air. And this process could take years, to really sculpt your tree. And it's a very forgiving process too. Don't worry about but it helps to take, some kind of pruning class just to kind of get a hang of it a little bit. And then training branches for good angles, like you can either cut something at the bud, and then that bud's going to be the new branch angle. Or just you can mold your branches, to be the angles that you want. Or instead of cutting branches, you can actually weigh down a lot of branches with rocks and bricks and stuff, pull them down. And then if you keep that, you keep pressure on that branch for a year, that branch will solidify into that angle. So you can have spacers and things like that. A lot of times pruning for production, so like peaches and fig trees, they only produce fruits on new growth. So making sure that pruning them back really heavy every year is going to cause a lot more new growth. So like these peach trees, like this is a new growth. This is where the peaches are going to be growing in the pencil's diameter branch. All that this is the year before its growth, and that's not going to produce any peaches. It's only on this new growth. So cutting that back, and then like on the new growth, don't cut all the stuff out. Just cut the big branches back, but leave these new growth. Maybe sometimes you might want to cut them back like a little bit, but if it's a really long one, it's going to have branches that are going to break the branch. But just a heavy prune your peaches and figs, and then your spurs. Like I said, every 5 to 10 years you want to prune your spurs, because you really only want to have like 2 or 3 fruits coming from a spur, but they'll eventually get more and more fruit, and there'll be like 10 pieces of fruit coming from that spur. This is what I was talking about, apical dominance. If you buy a fruit tree, most of the times, if it's like a young fruit tree, it's just going to come as a whip. A whip is just a single branch. And again, like the top bud is growing, but it has dominance over all these other branches. So if you cut that off, like take a foot off or something, or 6 inches, and you just cut it down to right above a bud, that's going to release a lot of the dominance, and you should get a lot more lateral branches, and you should start getting a tree that's growing. But a lot of times, I mean, I'll let the tree grow in the ground for a year or two before I start, pruning anything, just to let it establish itself. It's pruning to train. So if you want, this is called the exfoliate. If you want to do the exfoliate, branches like two-dimensional branches along walls. So it just takes a lot of pruning every year. You got because it's going to have lateral branches. It's going to want to have a central leader again. It's going to fight you. So every year you kind of have to like prune back any growth that's growing in the wrong direction. So it's a lot of pruning with to maintain these guys. And then so if you wanted to get more into like fruit trees and holistic growth, there's some really great books. This guy actually does fruit tree classes in Philadelphia. Really great book and really great classes you can check out. There's a lot of great books out there for fruit trees. And yeah, so that's basically it for our fruit tree class. I'll stick around for a little bit longer if anyone has any further questions. You can unmute yourself or chat or type them in. So I see a couple questions already. Or no, I don't. Yeah, sorry. Well, thank you all so much. Like I said, I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Someone says, please don't forget to upload presentation. The presentation should be uploaded right now in the Google Doc. And I'll upload the video later today.
We're continuing one of the books you started. Or write the poem for grandma.
Or a painting.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you all so much. Take care.